Have you ever, like, sat in a meeting and you're just watching a genuinely terrible decision happen in slow motion?
Oh, absolutely. It's the worst feeling.
Right. You know exactly how to fix it. I mean, the solution is just glaringly obvious to you.
Yeah.
But you stay silent. You just sit on your hands because you look around the room and you think, well, I don't have director or VP in my title.
Right. Yeah. Like it's not your place.
Exactly. It's not my place to speak up. So if you have ever felt that specific, incredibly frustrating paralysis, you are absolutely going to want to stick around for this deep dive.
It's a super universal feeling, but it is also a trap. We often condition ourselves to believe that influence requires this formal mandate from on high. And today we are basically dismantling that idea completely.
Yeah, we're tearing it down. So to get into this, today's deep dive is focusing on the core philosophy behind this really fascinating framework. It originates from a book called Leading by Design, which is the designer's guide to leadership without authority.
By Raymond Okoro.
All right, Raymond Okoro. And he built his career as a product designer across all these various tech ecosystems. But just to be clear, what we are doing today is stripping away all that specific software industry context.
Yeah, we're not talking about software today.
No, we want to look purely at the underlying mechanisms of human influence. Because the premise here makes this incredibly bold claim, which is you don't need permission, and you certainly don't need a fancy title to lead.
Yeah. The central thesis is basically that if you understand the fundamental methodologies of design, so, if you know how to empathize with people, how to synthesize chaotic information and prototype tangible solutions, well, you already possess the raw materials of leadership.
You just need to know how to use them.
Exactly. The missing link for most people is simply the organizational politics. It's that gap between, having an objectively good idea and actually navigating a complex human system to get people to act on it.
Okay, so let's start with a foundational concept they talk about, which they call the designer's paradox. And I feel like this applies to almost any modern knowledge worker.
Well, 100%.
You are hired to care deeply about an outcome. You're expected to just obsess over the quality of the final product or the service. Yet, you are rarely handed the actual organizational power to mandate any necessary changes.
Yeah, you carry all the emotional and professional responsibility for the experience, but you have zero formal authority to enforce it.
Which is wild.
It is wild, and that paradox is exactly what breeds the frustration you mentioned in that meeting scenario earlier. And it really stems from a deeply ingrained myth, which is the myth of the title.
The idea that leadership is a noun.
Right. Corporate culture teaches us that leadership is this tangible thing bestowed upon you from above. You get a promotion, someone updates your email signature, and suddenly, poof, you are a leader.
Right, like you've been knighted or something.
Yeah, exactly. But leadership, in its most functional form, is merely the act of moving a group of people toward a better future state. That's it. And it requires 3 ingredients: vision, influence, and action.
Vision, influence, action.
Yeah. And none of those actually require managerial approval to deploy.
Okay, I do have to push back a little on the action part, though.
Okay, go for it.
Because acting without permission in a highly structured, corporate environment sounds incredibly risky. Like if you just go rogue because you're tired of waiting at the intersection, I mean, you might get where you're going, but you might also cause a massive crash and just get yourself fired for insubordination.
That is a really critical distinction to make. Unchecked action without influence isn't leadership, it's just rebellion.
Right.
The goal isn't to break the system, but to maneuver within it intelligently. There's this great case study in the source material of a mid-level employee named Sarah that illustrates how to thread this exact needle.
Oh, yeah, the checkout flow thing.
Right. So her company was facing a crisis with their e-commerce checkout flow. Conversion rates were just plummeting, and customer support was overwhelmed with angry emails. Naturally, every department head had a different, very expensive theory about why this was happening.
Because of course they did.
Of course. So engineering argued the whole code base needed a rebuild. Product wanted to add more alternative payment options. And marketing insisted the fix was injecting more upsells to offset the lost revenue.
Okay, so engineering wants a rebuild, product wants payment options. I'm guessing Sarah, being mid-level, didn't exactly have the juice to just override a VP of engineering. So what is her play here?
Well, she circumvented the debate entirely. She gathered undeniable behavioral evidence. She just went out and ran usability tests with real customers.
Just skip the internal arguments completely.
Exactly. And she found the root cause had nothing to do with code bases or payment options. Users simply couldn't tell which form fields were required until they hit submit and were met with this massive wall of red error messages.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
Right. People were getting frustrated and just abandoning their carts. The problem was literally missing asterisks on mandatory fields.
You're kidding. Just asterisks.
Just asterisks. Now, Sarah couldn't order engineering to halt their entire roadmap to fix this. She wasn't a lead.
And like, if she just dropped a PDF report of her findings in a random Slack channel, it probably would have been completely ignored anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, data without a narrative rarely changes minds.
Exactly. So she took a different kind of action. She built a highly realistic, clickable prototype of the fixed checkout, just on her own.
Wow.
Yeah. Then she edited together a 2-minute video, and it showed actual customers visibly struggling and cursing at the old checkout, followed immediately by them just breezing through her new prototype. She didn't ask for permission to build the case, she just built it.
Okay, the visual evidence is a great start. Like, you can't argue with video.
Yeah.
But she still has to get those executives to actually agree to do the work. How do you pitch a solution to 3 different leaders who all think they already know the answer?
By entirely removing her own ego from the pitch. She didn't call a massive combative meeting. She just held one-on-one conversations with each executive and fundamentally altered her vocabulary for each of them.
Well, that's smart.
Yeah. To the engineering lead, she didn't talk about user experience. She pitched it as a lightweight 3-day patch that would prevent a massive, risky code base rebuild.
Which they would love.
Right. To the product lead, she translated her fix into pure metrics. So projected additional monthly revenue based on her prototype's completion rate. And then to the head of customer support, she pitched it as a targeted strike to reduce their checkout complaint tickets by 67%.
I mean, it's the exact same solution, right? But she's wrapping it in 3 completely different value propositions based on what the person across the table is incentivized to care about.
Exactly. And that framing is the difference between formal and informal leadership. Formal authority relies on forcing compliance. People do the work because they fear the consequences.
Right, because my boss called me to.
Yeah. But informal leadership, which Sarah demonstrated beautifully, inspires people to act because the proposed solution solves a problem they personally care about. By creating genuine buy-in, they implemented her fix, saving the company significant revenue, and all without her needing a title.
So if Sarah's success came down to taking the right kind of action, what is it about the designer's skill set that uniquely positions them to see that solution in the first place? Because the whole philosophy here argues that core design skills function as this hidden advantage in corporate leadership.
Well, it breaks down into 5 underlying capabilities. You have empathy, synthesis, facilitation, systems thinking, and communication through making.
Okay, so 5 things.
Yeah. And the thing is, most corporate executives are promoted for their technical prowess in a specific vertical, or honestly, simply their tenure.
Right, they've just been there the longest.
Exactly. They aren't necessarily trained to navigate highly ambiguous, cross-functional human problems.
It makes me think of an optometrist, like sitting in the optometrist's chair looking at the eye chart.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Yeah, so sales looks through the machine and says, well, it's blurry on the left. Engineering looks through and says, no, it's blurry on the right. And the designer's job isn't to fix the blur directly in isolation. Their job is to synthesize all that conflicting feedback and basically flip the lenses, click, click, until everyone in the room is looking at the exact same sharp image.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize the capability of synthesis. There is this anecdote in the material about a strategist named Elena that brings that optometrist analogy to life perfectly.
Oh, really? Tell me about Elena.
So she was sitting in on a highly volatile quarterly roadmap meeting. 3 senior executives were locked in a total gridlock over resource allocation.
The classic budget fight.
Exactly. Sales was demanding a massive CRM integration because deals were stalling in the pipeline. Customer success was demanding an intricate onboarding analytics dashboard because new users were churning at an alarming rate. And engineering was begging for a total architectural rebuild of the notification system because the servers were buckling under the load.
And knowing how these meetings go, they probably all brought airtight spreadsheets, proving their project was the single most critical thing to the company's survival.
Of course they did.
So when everyone is objectively right about their own pain point, how do you break the tie?
You don't break the tie, you change the game.
Okay.
After 2 hours of circular arguing, Elena, who was primarily there just to take notes, walked up to the whiteboard. And this is the application of communication through making. She visually mapped out the 3 seemingly disparate demands. By drawing the system out, she synthesized the chaos.
What did she draw?
Well, she showed the room that sales was losing deals because prospects couldn't grasp the product's value quickly enough. Customer success was seeing churn because users weren't finding value in their first week. And engineering's notifications were crashing the system because users weren't engaged enough with the core platform to care about the alerts being sent.
So instead of three separate, million-dollar problems, she basically flips the lenses and reveals they're all suffering from the exact same root illness. Like, new users just do not understand the core value proposition in the first 7 days.
Precisely. By identifying that unified problem, she could propose a unified solution, which was a comprehensive redesign of the first week onboarding experience.
Wow.
And the fighting stopped immediately. By making the abstract arguments tangible on the whiteboard, she aligned the executives. Relying strictly on abstract words and bullet points on a slide deck often leads to misinterpretation. But when you can take immense complexity and synthesize it into undeniable clarity, you are directing the strategy of the room regardless of your hierarchical ranks.
I see the power in that synthesis, for sure. But here is where my cynical side flares up a bit.
Uh-oh.
Well, let's talk about the reality of corporate life. Because we all know you can execute a flawless whiteboard session, identify the root cause, present a solution backed by airtight logic, and management will still look you right in the eye and say no.
Yes. And this brings us to a major psychological hurdle known as the better argument fallacy.
The better argument fallacy.
Right. It is the somewhat naive belief that if you simply construct the most logical rationale and present the most robust data, truth and reason will naturally prevail.
Which it never does.
Rarely. It operates on the assumption that organizations are perfectly rational machines. But the reality is that organizations are deeply emotional, highly political, and fiercely triable ecosystems.
So if I spend 3 months doing rigorous research, I build a prototype, I have quotes from 50 users proving this will increase our revenue.
It can still fail.
Just because of office politics, that feels incredibly defeating. Like, if logic isn't the deciding factor, what are we even doing?
Well, merit is an absolute necessity, but it's rarely sufficient on its own. So to navigate this, the philosophy introduces something called the influence equation. It visualizes how an idea actually gains traction.
Okay, hit me with the math.
Picture it like this. Inside a set of parentheses, you have credibility multiplied by relationships multiplied by timing. Then, outside those parentheses, you add the quality of the idea.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following the math here. So the quality of the idea is just an addition at the very end.
Correct.
But credibility, relationships, and timing are multiplying against each other. Meaning, if your relationships with stakeholders are at 0 or your timing is a 0, that entire first half of the equation just cancels out to 0.
Precisely the point. A brilliant idea cannot overcome a 0 in the multiplier variables. Consider the case of Max. He was a user researcher at a massive healthcare technology firm.
Okay.
Max gathered irrefutable data proving that patients were abandoning the hospital's digital portal because the registration process was an absolute nightmare. It required patients to answer highly obscure questions about their medical history just to verify their identity.
That sounds awful.
It was. So Max proposed a ubiquitous, elegant solution: standard text message two-factor authentication.
Which is how we log into our banks, our email, literally everything. His logic is completely sound. He proved the drop-off rate, calculated the lost revenue, and presumably took it to the leadership team. And they killed it.
Instantly. His idea was a perfect 10, but his political equation was entirely zeroed out. The head of security vetoed it because his primary psychological driver was the fear of a HIPAA compliance violation. A data breach would literally ruin his career.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The chief medical officer vetoed it because he feared pushback from older, highly conservative hospital administrators, and engineering vetoed it because their roadmap was already bleeding over. Max attempted to use pure logic to defeat deep-seated, hidden fears and misaligned incentives.
Okay, but a massive failure like that usually kills a project permanently. I mean, the executives have dug their heels in and explicitly said no. How do you revive a dead idea without looking entirely insubordinate?
They're fundamentally altering the variables in the influence equation. Max didn't try to force the exact same pitch a second time. Over the next 6 months, he actively built his multipliers.
The relationships and credibility.
Exactly. He started scheduling casual coffee chats with the head of security. Not to pitch anything, but just to understand his daily pressures and what kept him up at night. He built operational credibility with the engineering team by volunteering to help them QA smaller, completely unrelated tasks. And most importantly, he waited for a shift in timing.
What created the opening?
The company pursued a major contract with a new hospital network that explicitly required them to demonstrate modernized security protocols.
Oh, perfect.
The window of timing suddenly flew open. Max returned to the head of security, but he completely reframed the 10 out of 10 idea. He didn't say a single word about user experience or patient registration friction.
Yeah.
He pitched two-factor authentication as a targeted security risk reduction and compliance upgrade.
So it's the exact same technical deployment.
Exact same, but framed entirely as a solution to the stakeholders' specific fear. And it was approved almost immediately.
That reframing is brilliant, honestly. But it relies heavily on having those relationships and that credibility in place already. If relationships and credibility are the heavy multipliers, how do you actively build them if you are starting at the absolute bottom of the org chart? Because if you're a junior employee, the head of security isn't just going to accept your calendar invite for a casual coffee chat.
No, they won't. You have to earn the right to be in the room. This is conceptualized as the credibility ladder.
The credibility ladder, okay.
You cannot leap straight to influencing high-level corporate strategy. Rung one is always craft excellence. You have to be undeniably competent at the specific job you are actually hired to do. If your basic deliverables are sloppy or always late, absolutely no one is going to entertain your strategic insights.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't critique the architecture of the house if you don't even know how to swing a hammer properly. But where do people usually get stuck?
The massive point of friction is almost always between rung one and rung two, which is business understanding. Many individual contributors become obsessed with the purity of their craft. Perfect code, perfect pixels, perfect copy. And they refuse to learn how the company actually generates revenue and sustains itself.
They just want to do their art.
Right. But if you can't speak the language of the business, you will always be viewed as a tactical executioner, not a strategic partner. Rung 3 is strategic thinking. Rung 4 is proactive problem solving. And the top rung, the pinnacle of influence, is multiplying others, consistently making the people around you better and more successful.
You know, to me, climbing that ladder and managing these different stakeholders feels a lot like being locked in an escape room.
Like an escape room.
Yeah, like you're trapped, you know there is a way out, but you can't just run up and try to break the heavy wooden door down with sheer force or a beautifully designed pitch deck. The door just won't budge. You have to comb the room for the specific hidden key that corresponds to the lock. And in the corporate environment, that hidden key is almost always the stakeholder's personal performance metric.
That is an incredibly accurate way to view it. If you do not know how a specific stakeholder earns their annual bonus, you don't actually know what game you're playing.
Yeah.
Let's look at a designer named Sophia who figured this out the hard way. She was tasked with simplifying a mobile checkout flow that was just bloated with 7 different screens. She wanted to condense it down to a seamless 3-step process.
Which sounds like an obvious win for the user. I mean, nobody wants 7 screens, but I'm guessing she hit a wall.
She hit a massive wall named David. He was the head of marketing, and he aggressively blocked her redesign. Now, on the surface, it looked like a classic turf war. You know, an executive who was just stubborn and actively hostile to good user experience.
Right.
But Sophia realized she wasn't fighting a design battle. She was fighting a compensation structure. David's KPIs were heavily anchored to average order value, or AOV.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yep. The primary mechanism David relied on to hit that AOV target was forcing users to click through clunky, interstitial promotional screens during the checkout process.
You mean those pop-ups that ask if you want to add like a warranty or socks to your order right before you pay?
Exactly those. Asking him to remove those screens wasn't asking for a design compromise. It was asking him to voluntarily take a pay cut. He was merely protecting his livelihood.
So what is the move here? Because if she goes to his boss, she creates a permanent enemy. If she yields, the user experience remains terrible. How do you solve a zero-sum game where either the user wins or marketing wins?
You reject the premise of the zero-sum game by doing something called enlarging the pie. Sophia didn't fight him on the interstitial screens. Instead, she spent time prototyping a third option. She designed highly personalized inline product recommendations that surfaced organically inside the shopping cart itself, rather than interrupting the flow with a new screen.
So she removes the friction of the extra screens, giving the user a fast checkout, but she maintains the real estate for David's upsell?
She actually improved his real estate. When they ran a split test, her seamless inline design didn't just preserve his numbers, it substantially increased his conversion rate. By understanding the hidden key, his bonus structure, she didn't just protect him, she actively helped him overperform.
Oh, wow.
The psychological shift there is profound.
Hmm.
She transformed a highly resistant adversary into her most vocal advocate. From that point on, whenever Sophia needed air cover for a project, David provided it.
I love that approach for
Yeah.
winning over a single difficult stakeholder, like David. But let's scale this up a bit. What if the challenge isn't just one person? What if you are looking at an entire organizational culture that actively, deeply resists modern user-centric thinking? Say you're at a legacy company that views your role purely as making things look pretty at the very end of the assembly line. How do you lead a culture shift in that environment?
Very, very quietly.
Quietly.
Yes. The data on this is stark. Roughly 70% of grand, sweeping corporate change initiatives fail.
70. That's massive.
It is massive, and it's because when a new methodology is announced via a massive company-wide town hall, declaring a transformation, it triggers the organization's immune system. The established culture will violently reject the new process because it demands too much behavioral change, too fast, usually without concrete, localized evidence that it actually works.
So sweeping revolutions are out.
Yeah.
What is the alternative? How do you change a system without triggering the immune response?
Through the patient, relentless accumulation of small wins. It is a long-term strategy of localized infiltration. Take the story of Olivia.
Okay, let's hear about Olivia.
She was hired into a 50-year-old heavy manufacturing company. The entire culture was dominated by legacy engineering mindsets. The internal software tools they built were staggeringly complex and just incredibly user-hostile.
The kind of internal tools where you need a 50-page manual just to figure out how to reset a bit of machinery.
Exactly that. Now, if Olivia had marched into the executive suite demanding mandatory user research phases for every engineering project, she would have been marginalized immediately. The immune system would have attacked.
Right.
Instead, she located one single, highly visible pain point. The customer support division was burning through hours every single week trying to help clients navigate a specific equipment configuration interface. It was a massive drain on resources.
So she targets the bleeding wound. What does she do?
She asked for permission to quietly run a lightweight redesign of just that single interface. No fanfare, no new company protocols. She spent time observing how clients actually thought about the configuration, reorganized the information architecture, and rebuilt the flow. It was a 2-week localized project.
And what happened?
The outcome was that support tickets regarding that specific configuration plummeted by nearly 80%.
80%. Okay, that is a huge measurable win. But if she is trying to build her own credibility and change the culture, she needs to broadcast that success, right?
Mm-hmm.
She needs to take the credit.
Well, this is where Olivia executed a masterstroke of influence psychology. She actively gave the credit away.
Wait, she gave it away. Why?
She allowed the customer support team and the assigned product managers to boast to leadership about how their collaborative effort fixed the massive resource strain. Later, she did the exact same thing on a different feature. She quietly conducted research, pivoted the engineering approach to match user needs, and when the feature saw record adoption, she sat quietly in the audience while the product manager presented the success story at the all-hands meeting.
I have to stop you there, because that goes against literally every piece of traditional career advice we ever hear. Why on earth would you give away the credit for a major win? Doesn't she run the risk of just becoming an invisible, highly exploited worker bee?
It seems completely counterintuitive until you analyze the underlying mechanics of corporate influence, specifically reciprocal altruism. Corporate capital functions as a marketplace of favors and dependencies.
Okay.
By letting the product managers and the support directors claim the spotlight, she made them look brilliant to their superiors. Human beings are deeply addicted to feeling brilliant and successful. Because their metrics and their reputations surged whenever Olivia was quietly involved in their projects, a powerful psychological link was formed.
Oh, it's like the mere exposure effect. They start associating her presence with their own professional advancement.
Precisely, and the dynamic completely inverted. Instead of Olivia pushing her methodology onto resistant teams, those teams began aggressively pulling her into their projects earlier and earlier.
Because they wanted to win.
Exactly. They became fiercely protective of her time and her design methods because those methods guaranteed their own success. Over the span of 3 years, Without ever once announcing a formal revolution, Olivia systematically rewired the company's culture. They established a dedicated design department, they integrated mandatory research into the engineering cycle, and launched a comprehensive design system.
That's incredible.
Not by mandate, but by creating an organic, undeniable organizational dependency on her ability to make other people win.
She basically hacked the resistance system by making the system require her success in order to survive.
Yeah,
That is an incredibly potent long game.
it really is.
So to distill this entire philosophy down, what we are really exploring is that leadership is not a title you wait to receive. It is a posture you assume. You do not need formal permission to synthesize chaos, to empathize with a stakeholder's hidden KPIs, or to prototype a path forward. You just need to marry your tactical abilities with a cold, clear-eyed understanding of human influence.
Yeah, it requires respecting the reality of relationships, mastering the variable of timing, and speaking the specific language of the metrics that actually drive the people around you.
And I really want to emphasize to you listening, these mechanics are not restricted to designers or tech workers. Whether you are in HR, engineering, marketing, operations, if you are trying to navigate a rigid hierarchy and enact meaningful change from the middle or the bottom of the ladder, these are the exact levers you pull.
Right, because knowledge is ultimately only valuable when it is applied. Design thinking at its core is just a structured methodology for understanding severe constraints, gathering objective evidence, and prototyping a better future state.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. But as always, we want to leave you with something actionable to consider.
Yeah. We've spent a lot of time today discussing how to apply this methodology to broken products and resistant corporate cultures. But consider turning that lens inward. What if you applied that exact same rigorous methodology to your own life? Have you ever actually sat down to wireframe your own career trajectory?
Oh, that's interesting. Have you ever objectively user-tested your own daily habits to identify where the hidden friction lies? You know how to synthesize chaos into clarity for an employer. Perhaps the most critical resistance system you need to analyze, iterate, and redesign is you. Next time you find yourself sitting in a meeting watching a terrible decision unfold, remember that you are not powerless. You possess the tools to change the trajectory. You just have to decide to use them. See you next time.